Art is an act of communication, often one that transcends the limitations of language and offers a mirror to our collective human experience. In choosing to create a series of ink drawings featuring grey figures standing side by side in various postures, the work becomes a quiet exploration of themes such as identity, conformity, alienation, and connection. Though minimal in colour and composition, such a series may carry a multitude of layered meanings, inviting viewers to consider the nuances of individuality within community and the subtle gestures that define our humanity. The monochrome palette of grey suggests a deliberate stripping away of external markers, such as clothing, colour, places emphasis instead on posture and presence. By removing specific identities from the figures, they are rendered as universal human forms. They could be anyone, stripped of class, race, gender, or personality. This anonymity creates space for projection, allowing viewers to see themselves or others in the figures and to consider the roles people play in groups, societies, and systems. The positioning of the figures standing next to each other, yet each with a distinct posture, raises questions about individuality versus conformity. Are these figures standing together as a show of solidarity, or are they aligned in a row, bound by some invisible force to conform? Posture becomes a language in the series. One figure might slouch, another stands rigid, while yet another leans subtly to one side. These differences, though seemingly small, communicate volumes: fatigue, resistance, resignation, or quiet rebellion. In a world that increasingly encourages homogeneity through social and cultural norms, these subtle variances can be interpreted as acts of individuality, asserting themselves within the collective. Ink, as a medium, also plays a symbolic role. Its permanence and stark contrast suggest finality and clarity, yet it also allows for a certain softness in wash or line that may evoke vulnerability. The ink may serve as a metaphor for the indelible marks of existence, each figure etched in place, unchangeable in its form and posture, yet carrying emotional ambiguity. The choice to use ink may reflect a meditation on the human condition, on how we are shaped and fixed by the experiences, cultures, and environments that surround us. The grey hue, occupying a space between black and white, can be interpreted as a representation of moral ambiguity, uncertainty, or emotional numbness. Grey is often associated with the in-between, neither here nor there, neither fully alive nor fully gone. It evokes a liminal space, a kind of purgatory, which aligns with themes of existential reflection. Perhaps these figures stand in waiting, metaphorically positioned in a state of pause, each posture reflecting their inner negotiation with time, self, and others. The repetition of the figure, rendered again and again with minor changes, can also reflect the modern human experience under systems that value efficiency, uniformity, and productivity over individuality. There's a resonance here with images of people standing in lines at immigration offices, in unemployment queues, or during wartime conscription. The simplicity of the form belies the complexity of the stories these figures might carry, with each shift in posture representing a different burden, hope, or resignation. On a more psychological level, the figures may represent facets of a single self. Seen this way, the series becomes a visual meditation on internal multiplicity. Just as people contain multitudes, different moods, personas, roles, the grey figures may be embodiments of various inner states. One figure may carry shame, another hope, another resolve. Standing together, they may depict the tension and unity within a single psyche and the complexity of being whole. Finally, the silent arrangement of the figures evokes a ritualistic or ceremonial quality. Their stillness and sameness may point toward themes of grief, remembrance, or protest. In this sense, the work recalls memorials where anonymous human forms stand in collective silence, inviting viewers to reflect not only on what was lost, but also on what it means to be part of something larger than oneself, whether that is a nation, a community, or the shared human experience. This series of ink drawings of grey figures standing next to each other in different postures may seem stark and simple at first, but carries within it a rich tapestry of possible meanings, from existential solitude to quiet resistance, from collective identity to intimate introspection. The work asks us to look closer, not just at the art, but at ourselves and the systems we inhabit. In this stillness and repetition, there is an invitation to contemplate the quiet, often overlooked aspects of what it means to exist alongside others. Visible, distinct, yet part of a larger shared formation. In this drawing of 4 grey figures arranged left to right, we are met not with movement or narrative progression, but with 4 frontal, direct confrontations. Each figure stands with their body facing forward, their gaze either fixed on the viewer or, in one case, deliberately obscured. There is no implied dialogue between the figures themselves. They exist in self-contained stillness, unified by orientation, but distinct in attitude, expression, and visibility. This tableau becomes an exploration of perception and presentation, how people look and how they allow themselves to be seen. The figure on the far left presents a neutral presence. His face is expressionless, his posture steady. He neither invites nor resists connection. His gaze meets the viewers directly but passively, without challenge or intimacy. There's an openness here, a kind of baseline from which the others deviate. He stands as a control, a human figure stripped of affect, just a body facing another body, a person seeing and being seen. In psychological terms, this is the face we often wear when withholding emotion, the kind that can be read as polite, blank, or quietly wary. It is not disengaged, but it holds something back. This neutrality invites projection from the viewer. It gives us no cues, and so we fill in the blanks with our own expectations or desires. It is a mirror in human form. Next to him, the second figure smiles openly. His body language remains the same as the first, frontal, square, steady, but the shift in expression dramatically alters the tone. The smile introduces warmth, a suggestion of communication. He doesn't just see the viewer, he acknowledges them. There is a soft invitation to connection, or perhaps a quiet internal joy that spills out across the threshold between art and audience. Crucially, though, the body does not move. This figure, like the others, is still. The smile does all the work, reminding us how minimal an expression can be while still creating emotional impact. His face transforms the neutral posture into something more engaged and humanized. He is the only one who seems to perform his presence, and we might wonder if that smile is for us or for himself. The third figure continues the pattern. Facing forward, body open, gaze intended for the viewer. But now the face is blurred. The erasure or smudging of facial detail interrupts the chain of visual connection. We are looked at, yet not fully seen. We cannot read this figure. The intentional obscuring of the face may signify anonymity, withdrawal, or even trauma. Unlike the first figure, whose face is neutral but intact, this figure's very identity is uncertain. The blurring might evoke the limits of perception, how some people in our lives remain inscrutable, how memory or distance or disassociation can render a face indistinct. In a group of otherwise legible characters, this visual loss feels jarring. We're reminded that while all four figures stand before us, not all are equally available. Some presences are partial. The fourth and final figure reasserts clarity. His face is once again visible, but it is asymmetrical. One eye is closed, the other stares out. His arms are crossed, but not defensively. Each hand gently grips the opposite wrist. The result is a posture that is composed, even ceremonial, but not relaxed. There's a sense of control here, of managed exposure. The figure allows one eye to meet ours while keeping the other closed, as if choosing how much to engage. This partial gaze suggests skepticism, privacy, or perhaps an inwardness that resists full encounter. He is not rejecting the viewer's look, but modulating it, meeting it on his own terms. In contrast to the smiling second figure, who offers a face fully open to interpretation, the fourth figure presents only part of his attention. The rest is reserved. Together, these four figures form a subtle gradient of presence. From the full but effectless availability of the first, through the social openness of the second, the disrupted visibility of the third, and the measured self-control of the fourth, the drawing presents four different ways of being seen. Each body remains steady and frontal, emphasizing that what changes is not posture but expression and attitude, the terms of visual engagement. This tableau, stripped of background or gesture, becomes a quiet meditation on self-presentation. Who shows emotion? Who withholds it? Who reveals themselves fully? And who obscures their identity, even when facing forward? The viewer becomes implicated in this study. Each figure meets us, directly or partially, and we must decide what to make of their invitation, withdrawal, or opacity. This drawing is not a story in motion, but a portrait in contrast, a moment where the human face, even when stilled, tells us more than 1,000 movements. Through its quiet frontality and varied gazes, it asks, how much of ourselves do we reveal when we stand still and look back? The drawing's 6 grey figures form a softly descending arc of confidence, each one nudging the viewer's eye a little farther to the right, a little deeper into quiet uncertainty. Rendered without setting or personal detail, the bodies speak entirely through posture, gaze, and the muted choreography that connects them. They chart the slow unraveling of poise into withdrawal, as though we are watching self-assurance melt incrementally into introspection and doubt. The first figure, furthest left, stands square to us, arms crossed, but not defensively. Each hand gently cups the opposite wrist. This subtle grip feels more like containment than barricade, an effort to hold composure, steady. His eyes slide just past our shoulder, signaling that whatever occupies him lies outside the frame. He anchors the composition, offering the firmest, most centered presence the drawing will show. Beside him, the second figure mirrors the forward stance, yet lets attention drift farther right. One hand rises to the chin in a classic gesture of consideration. The body remains balanced, but the mind has already stepped away. This pivot of thought, literal in the turned eyes, begins the work of loosening the group's collective center. We sense the first murmur of uncertainty, housed in the fingertips, touching the face. The third figure embodies that uncertainty physically. Leaning awkwardly to his right, feet pressed together, he appears caught mid-shift, as if unsure where his weight belongs. His gaze follows the other's rightward drift, but with no anchoring gesture, no hand to chin, No arms crossed, his imbalance feels naked. The drawing's emotional center of gravity has moved. Composure is visibly tilting. With the fourth figure, the inward turn becomes explicit. Eyes closed, head and torso angled slightly right, left foot lifting in tentative motion. He is no longer present to the viewer's world. His attention folds behind lowered lids. The step suggests departure not so much from place as from dialogue, an impulse to exit the field of shared seeing. This is the drawing's quietest figure, a hinge between wavering poise and full retreat. The fifth figure hovers just beyond that hinge. He looks down at the fourth figure's chest with concern, judgment, or curiosity. We cannot know. Keeping one hand hidden behind his back, he withholds opinion, even as he observes. His stance introduces a relational tension, absent in the earlier figures. For the first time, someone looks at another body rather than at empty space. Yet, the concealed hand hints that whatever he sees, he chooses not to show his full response. Last comes the sixth figure, set slightly behind, head craned toward his own left leg. No gaze meets another. His world has collapsed. Where the composition began with open shoulders and forward faces, it ends in this self-absorbed curve. Orientation has rotated almost 90 degrees from the first figure's square stance, mapping an inward spiral of attention. Seen together, the six poses trace a psychological sequence more than a physical narrative. Each tiny adjustment, the turned eyes, the tilted pelvis, the lifted foot, marks another notch on a continuum from outward engagement to inward preoccupation. The gestures are small, easily missed, like the micro-expressions we glimpse on crowded streets. That understatement makes the descent more convincing. Doubt seldom arrives with a shout. It slips in, weight shifting, eyelid closing, wrist holding. The repeated motif of hands without grasp, clasped wrists, fingertips on chin, hands hidden, arms hanging, underscores an inability or refusal. Only the fifth figure's hidden hand hints at potential action, and even that is withheld. Meanwhile, every gaze, initially near the viewer, migrates rightward or downward, as if the air itself has tilted and drawn their attention off-screen. Because the figures are monochrome, their story is open. They could be 6 moments of one person, 6 colleagues anticipating news, 6 strangers sharing the low hum of collective unease. Whatever the reading, the drawing invites us to feel the slow siphoning of resolve, how a solid stance becomes a lean, how a lean becomes a step, how a step becomes a folding in. The viewer is left in the stillness after that folding, watching composure loosen thread by thread until what remains is not collapse exactly, but a hush in which something private has taken precedence over the common gaze. In that hush, the drawing does its most eloquent work, reminding us how quietly the distance between people can grow and how much can be spoken by bodies that, to the casual eye, seem scarcely to move at all. In this quietly charged drawing of 6 grey figures, a sense of spatial tension and psychological complexity unfolds across the paper. Though static in medium, the arrangement and orientation of these figures suggest subtle interpersonal dynamics and shifting internal states. The positioning, direction of gaze, and bodily gestures form a kind of unspoken choreography, less a literal narrative than a constellation of individuals caught in the act of noticing, reacting, distancing, or confronting. This is a composition built on nuances, on glances that do not meet, on bodies turned not just away from each other, but often slightly away from the viewer, and on postures that suggest unease as much as presence. The first figure on the far left stands most assertively in relation to the viewer. He is oriented directly forward, looking outwards, engaged, present, almost confrontational in his gaze. There is no evasion in his posture, no visible tension. This figure becomes the entry point into the drawing, a kind of anchoring presence whose stability throws the more complex orientations of the others into relief. He offers a full view of the body and face, establishing a visual and psychological openness. Next to him, the second figure mirrors his frontal orientation, but begins to shift. Caught in the act of stepping forward, he adds a layer of movement and directional ambiguity. His gaze turns slightly rightward, not quite meeting the viewer's eyes. There is still a sense of openness here, but the attention is redirected toward something beyond the viewer, or perhaps toward the emerging configuration of the other figures. It is a transitional posture, from stillness to motion, from presence to distraction. The third figure breaks from the frontality altogether. His entire body turns to the right, looking toward the remaining three figures. This shift marks a movement away from individual self-presentation and toward group awareness. He is the first figure to redirect attention fully, signaling a change in emotional temperature. His posture, turning towards others, suggests curiosity, apprehension, or surveillance. What is he seeing? Or what is he about to address? The fourth figure continues this turn to the right, echoing the third figure's gaze. Yet, as he looks toward the final two figures, he acts as a kind of bridge, half participant, half bystander. With two figures now engaged in the same directional gaze, a narrative line begins to form. Their attention does not rest on the viewer, but on the scene unfolding to their right. They have become watchers. What they watch appears to be the emotional focal point of the drawing, the fifth and sixth figures. The fifth figure stands slightly apart, physically distanced from the fourth. He holds his right hand near his chest in a gesture that reads as defensive, uncertain, or protective. His gaze returns leftward, away from the figure nearest to him, and just past the viewer. There's a disconnect here, a looking back without moving back. The posture suggests self-consciousness, perhaps guilt or anxiety. It is as if he senses the weight of the collective gaze, but cannot meet it directly. The final figure, sixth in line, like the first two, his body is oriented towards the viewer, but his head turns left, his gaze meeting an invisible point slightly off to the side. His posture is straight, his gaze poised, less tense than the fifth figure, but not quite at ease. He looks in the same direction as the fifth, echoing the backward glance. This parallel creates a doubling effect, two figures at the edge, both caught in a moment of disengagement from the others, both looking not at each other or the viewer, but just past them. Together, these six figures form a progression that is more emotional than chronological. The line of sight, gestures, and spatial relationships suggest an unfolding psychological narrative. It is not a story with a clear plot, but a composition that asks questions. What is being seen? What is being avoided? Who is observing whom and why? The figures, all rendered in grey, remain neutral in tone but emotionally rich in form. The lack of facial expression is counterbalanced by the precision of gesture and orientation. The viewer becomes implicated in this arrangement, not just watching, but being watched, turned away from, or gazed past. Each figure's stance reveals something about the strain or intention of human relation, how we align ourselves with others, and how we handle being seen. Ultimately, the drawing is less about six individual bodies than it is about the invisible lines that connect and separate them. It is a study in relational geometry, an architecture of glances, steps, hesitations, and orientations that map not space but feeling. In this way, the composition resists resolution. It remains suspended in a moment of quiet tension, unresolved and revealing. In this drawing, the composition reads like a slow unfolding of human dynamics, from inner contemplation to outward assertion to subtle resistance and collective scrutiny. The standing figures are unified in one physical detail, closed fists. This repeated gesture becomes a silent motif for restraint, power, defensiveness, or determination, shaping the emotional undertone of the scene. Despite this shared bodily signal, the figures diverge widely in expression, orientation, and posture, revealing layers of individuality, conflict, and psychological nuance. The first figure, positioned on the far left, is unique in both gesture and presence. Facing the other 5 figures to the right, his eyes are closed, a marked contrast to the open gazes that follow. This figure feels withdrawn, not disengaged, but internally focused. His stillness and shut eyes suggest a private moment of thought or detachment, even as he turns towards the group. He could be meditating, ignoring, or grieving, but in either case, he sets the tone for a composition concerned with perception, both inward and outward. To his right, the second figure stands in sharp contrast. Positioned frontally, facing the viewer, he wears a subtle, knowing smile. His stance is alert, a soldier-like attention, yet his expression is not severe. Instead, there's a softness, a suggestion of control or quiet confidence. He becomes a kind of hinge between the contemplative isolation of the first figure and the intensity of the figures that follow. In this figure, we sense an awareness, not just of himself, but of the performative nature of being observed. The third figure amplifies that performance. Standing powerfully in a wide-legged stance, with hands on hips, the iconic Superman pose, he looks directly at the viewer with a piercing, unflinching gaze. The energy here is assertive, even confrontational. This is a figure who embodies control, strength, and perhaps defiance. The fists here lose their ambiguity and become declarations of self-possession, a visual metaphor for command. His presence suggests dominance, but also begs the question, what is he confronting, and whom is he trying to impress or challenge? Standing beside this confident force, the fourth figure is noticeably more casual, yet his nonchalance is edged with critique. Slouching slightly, with weight shifted to one leg and one arm draped on his hip, he looks to the right with a cool, possibly judgmental expression. There's a sense of skepticism here, of watching others perform while withholding approval. His slight lean and sideways glance turn him into a commentator within the scene, aloof, superior, and possibly disenchanted. His closed fists, like those of the others, imply control, but his posture implies detachment, a refusal to be drawn in entirely. The fifth figure is in motion, stepping forward as though breaking from formation. His fist on his chest introduces a moment of feeling, a gesture that reads as personal and vulnerable within a context dominated by assertion and tension. His face is forward, but his body moves, subtly disrupting the static alignment of the others. This movement adds to the drawing's narrative flow, suggesting a shift, someone moving out of rank or perhaps into a new role. Whether he is confronting, confessing, or committing is unclear. At the far right, the sixth figure closes the sequence, physically and psychologically. His body faces inward, looking across the rest. He becomes the observer of observers, scanning the figures that have, in varying ways, presented themselves to the viewer or each other. His posture suggests a awareness of the viewer, of the performance, and perhaps of the tension within the group. His chest is slightly forward, his gaze measured as if calculating the emotional dynamics at play. In this arrangement, the drawing creates a progression not only of movement from stillness to step, but also of psychological states. There is isolation, confidence, critique, and contemplation. The fact that every figure holds closed fists gives the scene an undercurrent of held energy. These are not relaxed people. Each one seems on the verge of saying something or suppressing it. The fists may represent anger, self-discipline, repression, or resolve, but crucially, no hand is open. Together, the figures form a tableau of quiet confrontation. Each figure is a variation on how people manage inner strength or fragility in public, how we pose, assess, approach, withdraw, and watch. The spatial composition suggests a narrative, but leaves it open-ended. This drawing, minimal in color but rich in posture, is a study in the complexity of human presence. Through the simplicity of gesture and orientation, it speaks about power, perception, and the spaces we negotiate between each other. This composition of 5 grey figures explores the subtleties of human communication, anxiety, and proximity through posture, gesture, and orientation. Arranged in a linear sequence from left to right, each figure appears caught in a private moment of tension or concern. Yet they are all connected in their shared gaze and implied emotional dialogue. Despite their lack of individual identity, the figures convey a collective experience, the burden of unspoken thoughts and the complexities of internal distress, observed and mirrored within a group dynamic. The first figure on the left stands facing the viewer, but turns his gaze towards the rest of the group. His left hand covers his mouth, a classic gesture of hesitation, secrecy, or concern. The left foot's orientation to the right subtly underlines a psychological pull towards the others, suggesting he is engaged with them, but at a remove, perhaps an outsider, trying to comprehend an unfolding situation. The second figure stands adjacent, clasping his throat with both hands in a more visibly distressed gesture. This may be read literally as a depiction of a choking or breathlessness, or more figuratively as an embodiment of anxiety, vulnerability, or an inability to voice something. The throat, being both a literal channel for communication and breath, becomes a focal point for the suppression of emotion. His body faces forward, but the shared gaze to the right reinforces an emotional or narrative connection with the rest of the group. The third figure stands at the center of the composition, holding both his chest and stomach. This dual gesture compresses the upper and lower body in a way that expresses internal strain, perhaps pain, nausea, or emotional discomfort. The gesture is guarded and inward-facing, reinforcing a sense of personal suffering. That he is the only figure looking directly forward while clasping his torso in this way suggests he may be the emotional or thematic center of the composition. The figure through which all others are either reacting to or mirroring in their own way. To the right of him, the fourth figure adds a touch of ambiguity and perhaps even irony to the scene. He clutches his stomach with one hand, similar to the third figure, but his other hand scratches the back of his head, a universal gesture of puzzlement or doubt. The slightly slouched posture and asymmetry of his arms give the sense that he is trying to make sense of the physical or emotional tension around him. He is unsure, a participant, but also confused by the situation. Finally, the fifth figure on the far right seems to close the sequence with a posture that is upright, tense, and observant. He stands with his body facing left towards the other four characters. His stillness contrasts with the internalized gestures of the others. He appears to be watching them, perhaps trying to interpret what is unfolding or even judging from a distance. His uprightness and clear gaze suggest he holds himself apart, both literally and metaphorically. He might be a bystander, a witness, or a figure of authority. His distance from the more intimate bodily gestures of the central figure sets him apart as more detached, or perhaps just not yet affected. Together, the five figures represent a spectrum of responses to an unknown but emotionally charged situation. The progression of gestures, from covered mouth to throat clasping, from inward holding to confused scratching, and finally to poised observation, suggests an unfolding narrative about containment, emotional processing, and the search for understanding. They may be experiencing a shared crisis or simply expressing the many ways people respond differently to uncertainty or discomfort. Rendered in grey, the figures avoid individualization. Their monochrome anonymity invites viewers to project emotions or stories onto them, making the drawing universally resonant. There is no background, no setting, no specific context. All meaning is found in the tension between gesture and gaze, orientation and spacing. Ultimately, this drawing is about communication in its many forms: suppressed, confused, embodied, and observed. The lack of explicit interaction between the figures enhances the sense of internalization. Each figure is alone in their body and gesture, yet bound to the others by orientation and gaze. The composition encourages us to consider how emotions are held in the body, how we read others' discomfort, and how the presence of others can amplify, mirror, or contrast our own internal states. In this drawing of 6 grey figures, a quiet drama plays out across a flattened stage. The figures are arranged in a horizontal line, each captured in a distinct but interrelated pose. Their gestures, subtle yet resonant, suggest both intimacy and distance, vulnerability and poise. Though they neither speak nor move, a conversation unfolds, one composed entirely through body language, positioning, and the tension of observation. What emerges is a visual meditation on encounter, how we see one another, how we hide, how we present, and how we perform ourselves under the gaze of others. The first figure, standing at the far left of the composition, establishes the dynamic of the drawing. He faces toward the right, his body oriented toward the other 5 figures. He is not part of their line. He stands apart, a quiet observer. He does not impose himself, nor does he recede. He simply watches. His presence activates the rest of the composition, turning the gestures of the figures into responses, whether conscious or not, to the gaze he represents. He becomes both character and witness, setting the scene for an exploration of self-awareness. To the right of this observer stands the second figure. His body faces forward, but his posture is marked by a gentle defensiveness. His legs are crossed, a subtle folding inward. His right hand obscures part of his face, shielding his mouth and cheek, an instinctive gesture of privacy. The left hand touches the right wrist delicately, completing the gesture with quiet control. There is both beauty and hesitation in this pose, a desire to be seen perhaps, but only on one's own terms. He is not hiding entirely, but managing his exposure. The third figure continues this thread, standing slightly more open, but still self-contained. With legs set apart in a grounded stance, he raises his right hand to touch his left cheek. The gesture is thoughtful and reflective. His gaze drifts just to the side of the viewer, suggesting an interior world not fully shared. His left arm hangs loosely by his side, balancing the more active gesture of the right. This figure seems to be in thought rather than reaction, an individual moment held in the midst of collective presence. The fourth figure introduces a shift. His stance widens. His posture is more engaged. The right hand is held open, palm up, in a gesture that hovers between offering and questioning. His left hand is hidden behind his back, a subtle asymmetry that adds a touch of ambiguity. Is he concealing something? Is he simply relaxed? The ambiguity is what gives the figure depth. He faces to the right, slightly away from the viewer, moving the energy of the composition further down the line. The fifth figure mirrors the first. Like the observer, he faces the group, but now from the opposite side, where the first figure observed with quiet neutrality, this one makes a small but significant gesture. He extends his right hand, palm open, slightly forward. This could be read as a greeting, a pause, a signal. Unlike the static neutrality of the first figure, this one implies intention, a will to intervene or connect. He becomes a hinge between the fourth and sixth figures, bridging introspection and assertion. And then there is the sixth figure. He stands with assured posture, feet turned slightly inward toward the group, but chest raised and gaze slightly above and beyond the viewer. His arms hang at ease, slightly lifted from his sides, as if ready to act or respond. There is confidence here, even charisma. His chin is raised, not arrogantly, but clearly. He is the only figure in the drawing who seems not to look toward another body. Instead, he looks beyond, outward, upward. In him, the inward tension of the earlier figures turns into outward projection. What binds these six figures together is the delicate balance of interaction and solitude. Each is isolated within their own pose, their own inward logic, but the gaze and orientation of their bodies create threads of connection. The two facing figures, the first and the fifth, serve as bookends, a visual bracket around the more complex inner states of the central figures. The drawing resists narrative, but is rich in implication. It could be a psychological portrait of a group dynamic, or a symbolic meditation on visibility, vulnerability, and selfhood. The use of grey, the absence of expressionistic detail, and the abstracted gestures all contribute to a sense of emotional quietness. This is not a dramatic scene, but a contemplative one. The figures do not demand attention. They invite interpretation. We are not told who they are, but we are shown how they are. Watching, shielding, touching, offering, standing, falling into presence. In the end, the drawing reads like a score of human behavior, a study of postures under observation, of subtle responses to being seen or unseen. It reminds us that the body speaks even in stillness, and that even in silence, something is always being said. This drawing of 5 grey figures is a meditation on quiet unraveling, on the subtle collapse that originates in vulnerability. Each figure, rendered in muted greys and anonymous form, is caught in a gesture of containment, transition, or fall. Together, they narrate a progression not just of physical postures, but of internal states, an emotional choreography, tracing the arc from composure to rupture. It is a portrait of collapse, not a spectacle, but as something intimate and human. The first figure, furthest to the right, stands with a composed, self-contained stillness. His posture is open but modest, grounded and relaxed. His gaze turns into the scene, observing, perhaps sensing. He cradles one wrist with the opposite hand, a gesture soft in its restraint. There is a sense of awareness, of internal monitoring. This is the starting point of the sequence, a body that is calm, pensive, but still intact. There is no drama in this figure, only a readiness, a subtle presence. The second figure, just left of the first, begins to lean. The shift is minor but perceptible. The stance still appears composed, but the symmetry has tilted. His gaze pushes deeper into the composition, and his body follows, slightly inclined. One hand drops to his side, while the other remains near the ribs. An echo of the first figure's gesture, now opened up. There is a softening here, an early tremor of destabilization. It's not yet discomfort, but perhaps inquiry or concern. This is the moment when the body leans into its feeling, when thought becomes sensation. The third figure marks a break in this progression. Unlike the forward momentum of the second figure, this figure hesitates. He leans backward, his balance uncertain. He has shifted behind the line, not quite in retreat, but wavering. His hand hovers protectively near his chest, near the heart, a reflexive response, a defense. His gaze is still cast leftward, caught between where he stands and what unfolds ahead. There is a subtle recoil here, as if the figure senses a threat, not external, but internal, a fear of feeling too much, or of what lies further into the sequence. It's the body's resistance to continuation. Yet, the drawing does continue, and the fourth figure, standing left of the third, illustrates this inevitable pull toward collapse. He steps forward, not proudly, but folding inward. His back curves, his eyes drop. The forward motion of his right leg is not energetic, it is weighted, weary. Both hands now hold the chest, the seat of breath, vulnerability, emotion. It is no longer a gesture of thoughtfulness, but of burden. The forward tilt of the body mirrors the emotional turn inward. There is no denial now. This is the body cradling its ache. The fifth figure, furthest to the left, completes this descent. He is no longer standing, he is falling. Bent sharply at the waist, knees collapsed into right angles, his body is caught in a moment between surrender and impact. His right arm shoots downward, instinctively protecting him from the ground, while his left hand remains on his chest, unwilling or unable to let go of what he's holding. The back of his head is cropped out of the composition, indicating that the frame can no longer contain his fall. The drawing cannot physically hold the weight of what this figure expresses. His collapse exceeds the image. The figures form a visual arc from verticality to horizontality, from poise to breakdown, but the drawing resists melodrama. The grey palette and simple forms give no name to the emotional content. What makes the work powerful is its quietness, the way it captures the body as a site of emotion, of transformation, of subtle revolt. Each gesture is believable, familiar, human. We recognize the hand to the chest, the curled posture, the slight lean forward or backward. These are not exaggerated theatrical forms. They are the micro expressions of a soul under pressure. This is a drawing about the slow revelation of internal weight, how emotions inhabit and deform the body. It captures the moment when the unseen becomes visible, when what is felt deep inside finds form in the curvature of the spine, the tilt of the head, the bend of a knee, and ultimately the space left behind the final figure, uncaptured, falling, reminds us that such collapses are not neatly framed or completed. They spill out unresolved. In this sense, the drawing invites compassion, not as a plea, but as a recognition. This is what it looks like to hold something quietly, to try to contain it, and to eventually succumb to its gravity. This drawing of 5 grey figures captures a deeply human primal progression of physical and emotional containment. The image reads as a visual meditation on the embodiment of internal experience, particularly suffering, restraint, and collapse. Each figure, while individually posed, participates in a subtle and deliberate sequence, suggesting phases of a unified process. The result is a wordless depiction of how pain, especially of the unseen internal kind, can spread, settle, and distort the human form. The first figure, at the far right, stands like a sentinel. His upright posture and straight legs evoke discipline, perhaps denial. He resembles a soldier standing to attention, his body stiffened, leaning ever so slightly forward, not aggressively, but with anticipatory tension. His own hands hang at his sides. He is not yet touched by the visceral discomfort that ripples through the figures ahead of him, but his slight lean and focused gaze betray concern or curiosity. This is the posture of the rational mind, observing without yet being engulfed. The second figure, directly beside him to the left, takes a small step into a state of embodiment. His torso leans more forward. His right hand rests protectively or tensely on his stomach, indicating a localized awareness, perhaps pain, perhaps fear. This is a recognition of something beginning to take root inside the self. The discomfort may still be containable, still cognitively processed, but it has reached the body. The third figure continues the descent. He is more hunched, and for the first time, both hands cradle the stomach. His head is bowed, eyes fixed downward. The internal has become dominant. His right foot stepping forward suggests movement. Perhaps he is advancing in the queue, or perhaps this is symbolic of a forward collapse into his condition. The body contracts. There is a sense that the figure is losing touch with the social or spatial world around him, turning fully inward. The fourth figure embodies the same gesture, but with deeper surrender. His knees are bent, his stance wider, an accommodation to the gravity of discomfort. Like the third, he holds his stomach with both hands and looks directly at the ground. But there is a greater bend, a more permanent feeling sag. This pose begins to feel less like temporary suffering and more like a settled state. His body no longer tries to resist or stand tall. It is reshaped by the pain it contains. He is no longer moving forward. He has become still, heavy, with internal weight. The fifth figure on the left is the culmination of this progression. He is dramatically bent over, almost folded at a right angle. His hands remain clasped around his stomach, but his posture is more extreme. The neck is craned inward as if he is trying to see or reach into his own core, almost pleading with his body. Even his toes curl, anchoring him to the ground, suggesting a total physical response to the inner distress. He occupies the most visual space, grounding the composition with a dramatic halt. And importantly, there is space beyond him on the paper, as though anticipating his collapse or the need for him to exit the line altogether. This final pose expresses a kind of resignation, an embodied plea, or perhaps even transformation through suffering. Altogether, the five figures form a progression, both spatially and emotionally, from observation to collapse. They exist in a loosely defined queue, evoking institutional or existential connotations. Waiting rooms, migration lines, moments before diagnosis, scenes of forced patience or helplessness. The repetitive gesture of the hands on the stomach becomes a ritual of internal reckoning. There is something deeply familiar about it. It evokes physical pain, but also grief, anxiety, fear, guilt, any emotion that manifests as a clenching in the gut. The figure's grayness, anonymity, and sameness in shape allow the viewer to focus entirely on posture and gesture without distraction from personality or identity. They are not individuals so much as states, versions of the same being at different moments. There is an emotional rhythm to how they lean forward, how their gazes drop, and how their bodies collapse into themselves. This creates a slow, almost imperceptible narrative, not of time, but of internal descent. This drawing then is not simply about a group of people, it is about a process, the way that something internal and invisible takes hold of the body, creeping gradually through posture and gesture until it owns the form completely. And in the space left on the left edge, there is a kind of haunting pause, the silent suggestion that there is more to come, or that the process is not yet complete. This drawing of 4 figures presents a quiet but emotionally charged journey through states of vulnerability, self-consciousness, and composure, though devoid of overt narrative or specific environment. The piece moves with a clear emotional progression, offering a meditation on psychological transformation. The 4th figure brings the progression to a state of relative equilibrium, standing with arms relaxed at his sides and legs evenly spaced. He is the most physically open and grounded of the 4. His stance is stable, his orientation fully toward the viewer, and his gaze, though still lowered, is directed further out, extending past the immediate space in front of him. There is calm in this posture and clarity. The figure is not heroic, not celebratory, but collected. He represents a subtle confidence, the resolution after retreat, the breath after tension. Compared to the first figure's protective collapse, this is a body that is both fully present and at ease in its space. The 3rd figure marks a further evolution. Upright and lifted onto the balls of his feet, his hands press gently against his face, framing his temples and cheeks with open palms. It is not a gesture of panic, but perhaps of realization or contemplation. The stance, upright but slightly leaning forward, weight not fully grounded, speaks of tension between presence and instability. He looks ahead and downward, as if beginning to confront something just before him. This is the moment of recognition. He is face to face with his own awareness, his own becoming. It's a turning point, visible, exposed. Next to him, the 2nd figure emerges slightly from this internal withdrawal, but remains unsteady. His movement is ambiguous, a stumble, a run, or a faltering transition. The stooped posture, bent knees, and downward gaze imply hesitation and a lack of control. The positioning of the hands introduces a new emotional complexity. The right hand, raised near the ear, suggests a listening gesture, as though responding to an external call or signal, while the left hovers around the chest or mouth, protective, reflexive, uncertain. There's a sense of struggle here, not dramatic but intimate. He is caught in a moment of unbalanced motion, neither grounded nor fully adrift. The figure expresses the human experience of re-emerging from isolation or pain, timid, unclear, perhaps afraid of visibility. The first figure, crouched low in the bottom left corner, is folded into himself. His position recalls the fetal form, curled, withdrawn, protective. His left hand shields his face, while the right anchors him by grasping his bent knee. Though standing on his feet, he kneels into them as though compressing himself into the smallest possible physical and emotional footprint. This figure's orientation, turned towards the left edge of the page, suggests a retreat or resistance to forward motion. There is something almost post-traumatic in this pose, a response to overwhelm or threat. It is an image of internal retreat, of hiding from both outer gaze and inner recognition. Together, these figures chart a quiet metamorphosis, from contraction and concealment to cautious movement, through introspective awareness and finally to self-possession. Their sequence can be read as emotional phases, psychological states, or even steps in a single moment of internal processing. The transitions between them are not abrupt, but gradual, almost imperceptibly so, suggesting that human transformation is often subtle and non-linear. Each posture contains echoes of the last, remnants of fear or hesitation that continue to linger even as new strength emerges. Rendered in grey, the figures resist individual identity. Their anonymity makes them more universally legible, standing in for broader human conditions. They are not characters, but embodiments of feeling, gestures made visible. The absence of any background or contextual markers further reinforces this. The focus is entirely on the body and what it expresses. The drawing becomes a study not of narrative, but of presence, how the body carries memory, tension, and release. In this way, the piece quietly invites the viewer to recognize themselves. Each figure may reflect different facets of experience, moments of withdrawal, uncertainty, clarity, or calm. The overall effect is one of empathetic resonance. Without words or explicit action, the drawing offers a visual poem about endurance and self-regulation. It does not dramatize struggle, nor does it glorify strength. Instead, it offers something more honest: the complexity of movement through inner states, the dignity of small adjustments, and the soft resilience of returning to oneself. This drawing of 4 grey figures presents more than a simple arrangement of bodies in motion. It is a reflective study on physical negotiation, of gravity, balance, and awareness. The composition traces a subtle arc from inwardness to alertness, from effort to quiet standing, each posture distinct, yet part of a continuum. As in much minimalist figuration, the absence of context intensifies the presence of form. The figures seem less like individuals and more like moments or states of being, unfolding within a shared visual and conceptual field. The first figure, closest to the viewer in the lower left, is physically low, close to the ground, but intricately engaged. He supports himself on 3 points, his right hand and 2 feet, which are bent at the knees and pressed together. His pelvis hovers slightly off the floor, a suspended midpoint between grounded limbs. His left hand, resting on his knee, provides a stabilizing element. This pose is precarious, both active and uncertain. The figure looks down toward his knees, suggesting inward attention, focus, or perhaps self-monitoring. He is at once anchored and unsettled, contained by his own structure, held in a kind of interior scrutiny. The posture might speak to early attempts at self-support, a moment of hesitation before full movement is possible. Suspended above the ground and to the right, the second figure breaks free of this grounded tension. This figure hovers in a posture that oscillates between sitting and jumping, a paradox of flight and containment. His right arm reaches back, perhaps for balance or propulsion, while his legs are lifted at sharp angles, knees bent, toes curled. The torso remains upright, suggesting calm amid motion, and the gaze is directed forward. This figure is unanchored, liberated from the support of the floor, yet not chaotic. He embodies a moment of suspended transformation, like a person caught in a jump who has not yet begun to fall. The energy here is exploratory, transitional. It holds a tension between weightlessness and direction, between departure and arrival. The third figure returns to the ground, standing in a tentative, cautious step forward. His right arm trails behind him, while his left arm reaches forward with fingers open, perhaps to feel his way, perhaps in mild apprehension. His weight is clearly distributed, grounded on the left leg, the right leg lifted in motion. His gaze is downward and slightly ahead, consistent with his body's cautious progression. This figure occupies a liminal state, not frozen, not confident, but investigating his own path. There's vulnerability in this posture, the balancing act of moving forward with awareness of instability. Unlike the hovering second figure, this one accepts gravity, interacts with it, and works within it. He seems to be learning something through movement. Finally, the fourth figure breaks from the trajectory of the others, facing in the opposite direction. He stands upright, his legs together, arms at his side, fingers open, his neck craned forward. There is stillness and restraint here, perhaps even detachment. This reversal in gaze and position might suggest reflection, refusal, or reorientation. He does not follow the others, he looks back. His stance is contained, possibly resigned, possibly contemplative. He appears as a punctuation mark at the end of the sequence, offering a visual and conceptual counterweight to the forward drive of the first three. Together, the four figures create a nuanced rhythm: downward, lifted, grounded, turned. They are neither a simple narrative nor a strict chronology. Instead, they reflect a more subtle exploration of bodily negotiation, how we shift between effort, lift, movement, and stillness. These aren't athletic gestures or dramatic poses. They are quiet, deliberate, introspective. Each figure seems to be testing the relationship between body and ground, between direction and orientation. And perhaps that is the deeper resonance of the drawing. It's not just a study of form, but a reflection on human orientation, how we position ourselves in the world, how we shift between support and autonomy, how we test the unknown ahead or turn inward to recalibrate. The visual silence around them gives room to these possibilities. The figures float and stand not just in space, but in questions. How do we hold ourselves up? When do we leap? Where do we look when moving forward or when we choose to turn away? In this drawing, the human body becomes both question and answer. It is through form, suspended, grounded, cautious, still, that the viewer is invited into a shared meditation on presence, tension, and orientation in the quiet drama of becoming. In this drawing of four grey figures, we observe a silent, sequential study of motion and recovery, a choreography not of flight or collapse, but of rebalancing. These bodies, suspended in various states of readiness, tension, and landing, form a visual meditation on the embodied process of regaining one's center. Though the space they inhabit is undefined and their faces offer no expressive cues, their gestures communicate something familiar, the tenuous process of becoming stable again after being in motion physically, emotionally, or existentially. The first figure, located in the bottom left corner, offers a strange inversion of support. He balances himself using both his hands and feet, suspending his pelvis between them. His arms and legs are bent, forming a low bridge of the body. His gaze drops between his knees, a posture of introspection within strain. Though this figure is grounded by 4 points of contact, the posture is visibly effortful. There is no comfort here, but there is structure. He is held aloft by his own limbs, neither seated nor lying, hovering within a system of self-made tension. The pose seems to speak of bracing, not collapse, but not ease either. A moment of holding. Above and to the right, the second figure appears almost mid-transition. His knees are bent, his body slightly forward-leaning, and his arms hover at his sides, hands open. His neck stretches upward, and he gazes forward with a sense of alertness. This is a body caught halfway between sitting and jumping, still uncertain whether it is about to rise or has just come down. The figure radiates an energy of potential. Unlike the first figure's tight suspension, this one breathes. There is possibility in his form, an openness to what comes next. The third figure, continuing along this arc, offers an image of re-entry. His feet are firmly back on the ground. His knees are bent in a way that suggests recent impact, and his arms stretch forward, fingers splayed in a delicate balancing gesture. His posture resembles that of a gymnast completing a leap, body lowered, legs together, arms extending to steady the landing. He is poised at the point between flight and stability. The intensity of his concentration is implied by the tension in his spread fingers and the tilt of his gaze forward. He is not yet still, but refining his center. This moment is precise, transitional, and vital. The fourth and final figure stands in contrast to the earlier three. Positioned farthest to the right, his stance is broad, grounded, and open. His legs are spread in a confident footing. One arm reaches outward, perpendicular to the body, fingers wide in a firm gesture. The other arm bends above his head, also open-palmed, forming a subtle counterbalance. His gaze is directed straight ahead. There is no sense of tentative movement here, no bracing, no regaining. This is a posture of clarity and presence. He faces forward, not in aggression, but in assertion. He holds space with intention, compared to the low tension of the first figure and the hovering uncertainty of the second. This fourth figure radiates a grounded resolve. Taken together, the four figures suggest a progression, not of linear narrative, but of bodily state. From the awkward suspension of the first, through the poised in-betweenness of the second, into the regrounding of the third, and finally the confident openness of the fourth, we are shown a spectrum of embodied becoming. These figures are not flying, collapsing, or posing. They are stabilizing. They are learning through their own limbs and gestures how to hold themselves again. The use of grey, uniform, shadowless, renders the figures archetypal. They are not specific people in a specific time or place. Their neutrality allows them to become mirrors for the viewer. The lack of background or environment only deepens this effect. These figures exist in the blankness of conceptual space, in the realm of psychological motion. Their gestures are made more powerful by their isolation. We are left to feel rather than decode. Emotionally, the drawing evokes experiences of transition, those quiet but crucial moments when we try to get our bearings after a disruption or shift. The body in these poses becomes both metaphor and literal site of rebalancing. We see ourselves in the tension of the first figure, the pause of the second, the landing of the third, and the stance of the fourth. Each phase is recognizable, moments when we try to hold things together, feel the uncertainty of change, navigate awkward landings, and finally, clarity and openness. In this drawing of four grey figures, we are shown not a fixed moment, but a continuum of bodily and emotional motion. Arranged across the paper, their postures suggest a choreography of release, an unfolding trajectory between rootedness and surrender to flight. There is no depicted setting, no floor, no sky, yet the composition is rich with atmosphere. This is a visual meditation on the tension between control and abandon, the body as both weight and gesture. The first figure in the bottom left corner is rooted to the invisible ground. Lying on his back, knees bent, he uses his feet and arms to lift his lower back upward. His gaze is turned inward, directed toward his own right knee. The effort is modest, focused, and contained. There is no visible strain or urgency. His expression is neutral, composed. This figure anchors the composition, embodying an early stage of movement, intention. He is not in flight, but preparing, exploring what it means to push upward from a position of full contact with the earth. Above him, the second figure has broken from the ground. He clutches his right knee with his right hand, while his left arm stretches forward in a gesture of reaching. His back is curled as though mid-jump, or caught in that weightless second when the body floats before impact. There is a poise to this position, a foldedness that still holds its own energy. He hovers in a liminal space between past and future motion, as if deciding whether to dive or to ascend. In front of him, the third figure elongates this forward momentum, arms extended slightly above the head, fingers open, legs stretched in front at a right angle to the torso. He appears mid-leap, caught in the full commitment of a long jump. His posture has clarity, a horizontal reach, a full body thrust towards something beyond the page. His gaze is steady and forward-facing, mirroring his open body language. There is a sense of clarity here, of orientation, of intention given shape. Unlike the previous figure's folded potential, this one enacts motion fully. He flies. The fourth figure, on the right and lower than the second and third, draws the arc towards its conclusion. His posture is a dramatic release. Arms flung back, legs trailing behind, spine curved outward like a bow drawn to its limit. His torso and head stretch outwards, gaze tilted skyward. He is neither leaping nor falling exactly, but caught in a suspended gesture of freedom or surrender. There's an ambiguity here. Is he diving into something unknown or soaring into something unbounded? His form contains both possibilities. This is the most expressive, open posture of the four, suggesting ecstasy, exposure, and risk. Together, these figures form a non-linear narrative of departure. The composition does not depict a traditional story, but an emotional sequence, a psychological unfolding. The first figure embodies self-contact and subtle effort. The second suggests transition, compact, floating, exploratory. The third figure becomes purpose in motion, a dynamic stretch into the future. And the fourth enacts release, the shedding of tension, the embrace of vulnerability. They could be seen as phases of a leap, not simply physical, but existential. What gives the drawing its depth is not only the variety of poses, but the subtle continuity between them. Each figure is oriented forward in some way, whether looking inward at the body or outward into space. Their grey tones and faceless expressions strip away individuality, making them vessels of gesture, of inner experience made visible. They become avatars of movement, expressing what it means to lean forward into the unknown. The lack of a fixed environment amplifies this ambiguity. The figures hover in blankness. There is no floor to land on, no destination ahead. This makes their gestures all the more potent. They are not responding to a physical world, but to internal imperatives, impulse, will, instinct, release. The absence of context invites the viewer to project their own interpretations. Are we witnessing a psychological journey of awakening, striving, letting go? Or are these bodies illustrating the fine line between freedom and collapse? Perhaps what's most compelling is how the final figure, though positioned closest to the first in terms of spatial height, is the furthest in terms of expression. While the first figure lifts himself with care and control, the last seems to have let go entirely, swept forward by forces beyond will. His flight is beautiful but precarious. It raises a central tension in the drawing. Does movement toward freedom always involve risk? Is the ultimate gesture one of mastery or surrender? In the end, the drawing offers no resolution, only motion. But in this motion, something deeply human is revealed. Our bodies, like our lives, are always poised between groundedness and momentum, between the desire to hold on and the urge to let go. In this drawing, 4 grey figures are arranged in progression across the page. We find a quiet narrative of motion, not dramatic, but deeply human. The figures do not stand tall or fly, nor do they collapse. They occupy positions low to the ground, kneeling, resting, crawling, reaching. Their gestures speak of awareness, effort, and transformation. This is not a scene of despair, but of subtle emergence, of bodies in transition from stillness to movement, from interiority to outward engagement. The first figure, in the bottom left corner, sits in a kneeling position, leaning gently backward. His buttocks touch his heels, his arms stretch behind to support the weight of his torso. He gazes calmly forward. There is a serenity in this posture, an acceptance of gravity rather than a resistance to it. Though the body is low and reliant on the support of the arms, there is no strain. His expression, closed-mouthed and content, reflects a quiet readiness. He is not passive, but present, gathering himself. This is the moment before intention becomes emotion. Above and to the right, the second figure rises slightly from this grounded state. He remains kneeling, but his back is straighter, and his hips lift subtly from his heels. His hands are now vertical fists, planted at his sides, his gaze dropped inward toward his knees, his mouth slightly open. The shift is small, but meaningful. His attention has turned inward. The gentle poise of the first figure gives way to a more concentrated state. The fists, like stakes in the earth, convey resolve, perhaps tension. This is a figure in contemplation, preparing mentally and physically for further movement. The pose suggests an intermediate state, not yet action, but no longer rest. To the right, the third figure adopts a crawling posture. His body bends at a clean right angle, arms extended vertically downward, fists clenched on the ground. His gaze drops directly into the narrow space between his hands. This figure embodies focus, hyper-concentration on the immediate, the tactile, the present moment. His posture is stable, functional, but introspective. There is a sense of quiet struggle here, not dramatic, but essential. This figure is not yet moving forward, but he has left the vertical postures behind. He exists in tension, a balance of containment and pressure. Then comes the fourth and final figure, located at a lower position on the page, but further to the right. He is still crawling, but his posture is evolving. His right arm stretches ahead, fingers open and reaching. His left arm remains grounded, bearing weight. His neck and spine have elongated, his head lifted just enough to look toward his outstretched hand. His thighs push slightly forward as if to shift momentum towards the bottom right corner of the frame. This is the first clear gesture of direction. Forward movement, while still tentative and bound to the ground, begins here. The figure is no longer absorbed in himself. He is reaching beyond. Together, these 4 figures form a visual and emotional progression, a choreography of awakening. Unlike many depictions of change or growth, there is no grand transformation, no clear beginning or end. Instead, we see incremental development, awareness deepening, tension gathering, direction forming. The low physicality of the poses keeps the scene intimate and modest. But within these small changes lie profound shifts, from stillness to readiness, from contemplation to concentration, from containment to reach. The recurring motif of groundedness, each figure's shins touching the floor, grounds the entire composition in humility. These are not heroic figures. They are human in the most elemental sense, close to the earth, moving through internal states, struggling toward forward motion. The open hands of the final figure serve as a quiet climax, not a triumphant gesture, but a gesture of feeling, of reaching, of inquiry. In psychological terms, this sequence can be read as a depiction of gradual emergence from inward reflection to outward engagement. The drawing captures the nuance of recovery, of effortful attention, of transition between isolation and connection. It speaks to moments in life where we are not yet upright, but we are moving. We are still on our knees, but we are reaching. The monochrome palette reinforces this emotional subtlety. These figures are not individualized, but symbolic, grey, universal, introspective. Without context, the focus remains on the body, on posture as expression. The absence of a depicted floor or horizon only enhances the ambiguity. This space is psychological, not physical. We are looking not at a scene, but at a state of being. In this way, the drawing becomes a meditation. It invites the viewer not to witness a spectacle, but to recognize something within themselves. The slow, humble, sometimes difficult process of finding one's way forward. In an ambiguous space, 4 grey figures occupy positions that suggest gravity, flight, stillness, and escape. There is no background, no visible ground, and yet the scene feels anchored, rooted in human gesture, tension, and transition. The figures are arranged not in a line, but in a constellation, layered vertically and horizontally, forming a subtle spiral of movement that leads ultimately away. The result is a meditation on stasis, struggle, and release. The first figure, positioned in the bottom left, sits low to the ground, perched on his left foot while holding his right calf. His gaze, directed ahead, is calm but not empty. His pose is compact, protective, as if drawing the limbs inward, conserving energy. He is grounded literally and emotionally. There is a quiet intensity in the way he holds his leg, not as a gesture of pain, but of attention. This is a figure of inward focus, containment, and readiness. He doesn't move, he watches. Above them floats the third figure, an anomaly in this otherwise grounded composition. He levitates, lying on his back in mid-air, hands tense, legs extended in a kicking, destabilized gesture. His head curls inward to look down the length of his body, which appears to be in the process of either rising or falling. This is the only figure in a state of motion, of ambiguity. He seems to have been lifted by effort, trauma, or unseen force, and now hovers between control and collapse. His body is tense, reaching and recoiling at once. In this position, he is both vulnerable and transcendent. His floating challenges the reality of the others, introducing a surreal psychological rupture in the drawing. Just above him, the second figure reclines slightly, legs outstretched. He is slumped, his back and neck gently curled as he looks at his knees. There is a soft descent here, a sense of sinking, of introspection becoming weariness. His posture lacks tension, unlike the first figures. He has perhaps passed through the stage of containment and now rests in resignation or reflection. He doesn't engage outwardly. His entire field of attention is folded back into himself. If the first figure suggests poise, the second hints at fatigue, a loosening of will. Then, at the far right, stands the fourth figure, a striking contrast to all that precedes him. He is separate, a full step removed from the tightly composed trio. His arms are lifted in a triumphant gesture, head tilted back, legs extended in a kind of running tiptoe escape. He is departing mid-celebration, ecstatic, but there is no specific facial emotion, only posture. His exuberance seems instinctive, perhaps desperate. He runs away not towards something, but from something. And in doing so, he completes the arc the others have built. From stillness to surrender to suspension to flight. Taken together, the four figures form a fragmented narrative, open to interpretation. One reading might see them as representing stages of emotional or psychological passage. The first is containment, a kind of poised readiness. The second is introspection, even depression, where the body slumps, gaze downturned. The third is a rupture, a moment of loss or transcendence, when the normal boundaries are broken and the self lifts out of alignment. And the fourth, gleeful, detached, is the figure who escapes the weight of it all, but at the cost of connection. His movement away, his raised arms may be celebratory, but they are also solitary. There's a spiritual undertone to this scene as well. The drawing could be read as an allegory of transformation or release. The first figure meditates, the second grieves, the third rises in a moment of existential crisis. The fourth achieves a kind of liberation. But is it transcendence or denial? Is the final figure escaping or abandoning? His joyful stance contrasts sharply with the grounded, introspective presence of the others. There is beauty in his movement, but also ambiguity. He leaves, and no one follows. These are not individual characters with fixed identities, but symbolic presences, neutral, dreamlike, anonymous. Their forms are human, but they could just as easily be projections of internal states. In this way, the drawing becomes a map of the psyche. The figures are parts of a single mind, each posture representing a different relationship to crisis, awareness, or transition. These bodies are not in a place, they are in experience. Their orientations, tensions, and directions of gaze become the terrain. They act out a drama not of events, but of states: collapse, contemplation, eruption, flight. Ultimately, this drawing resists definitive resolution. It holds together as a moment suspended in time, a moment in which something is held, endured, and then released. What we are left with is not an answer, but a question. Which figure are we now, and which are we becoming? In this drawing, four grey figures are frozen in distinct postures, each locked into a gesture of looking, stretching, or positioning the body in relation to itself. There is no overt action, no narrative background, and yet the configuration suggests a choreography of inward searching, somatic inquiry, and fractured awareness. The arrangement, subtle, strange, and physically evocative, seems less about storytelling and more about the human effort to feel, locate, and understand oneself through the body. The first figure on the left, with hands on hips and pelvis pushed forward, arches backward in a posture of deliberate stretch. His neck is extended, his head tilted upward, gaze cast toward the sky or ceiling. This pose is one of openness, exposure, and assertion. It echoes the ancient gesture of seeking, lifting the head to the heavens, perhaps in search of vision, relief, or affirmation. At the same time, the pronounced thrust of the pelvis introduces a note of vulnerability, even theatricality. This figure announces himself bodily, as if saying, "I am here." He is the only one looking up, an outlier in a sequence otherwise grounded in downward focus. The second figure contrasts starkly. Bent forward at a 90-degree angle, also with hands on hips, his gaze is turned inward, down toward his own thighs. His body forms a perfect hinge at the hips, both controlled and constrained. This position evokes inspection, almost self-scrutiny. There's a mechanical precision to it, like someone folding into themselves to examine what cannot be seen from standing height. This figure suggests the analytical mind turned inward, one who resists upward vision in favor of minute observation, perhaps even self-critique. The third figure introduces a new dimension. He kneels, hands on hips like the others, but his gaze is no longer directed at himself. Instead, he looks down the leg of the fourth figure. His posture is humble, lowered, but his attention is directed outward, if still narrowly. He is not engaged in grand vision or self-inspection, but in a quiet, almost reverent study of another. Yet the dynamic here remains unresolved. The relationship is one of focused witnessing or perhaps subdued comparison. The fourth and final figure completes the sequence with a diagonally outstretched left leg and arms held in angular, awkward positions. He too looks down the length of his leg as if tracing a line or seeking meaning in its extension. Unlike the other figures, whose gestures feel controlled, even ritualistic, this figure's form appears disjointed, almost disrupted. His arms, bent at unnatural angles, suggest tension or confusion. There is an awkwardness here, a body trying to find alignment yet caught in discomfort. And significantly, both he and the third figure are looking in the same direction, down his leg, as if it contains some message or mystery. Taken together, the four figures become a kind of physical poem, a sequence of embodied thought. The recurring motif of hands on hips implies both containment and agency, a grounding gesture often associated with taking stock, asserting presence, or preparing for action. But the variations in posture and gaze suggest that each figure is engaged in a different mode of attention. One looks skyward, perhaps for meaning or relief. Another folds into himself, absorbed in detail. A third turns toward another in silent observation. And the last twists and stretches, searching for coherence in his own movement. One way to read this drawing is as a meditation on embodiment and perception. Each figure represents a different strategy for being present in one's own body and mind. The progression is not linear, but circular. Each posture informs and complicates the others. The shift from upward vision to inward gaze to relational observation to contorted self-sensing implies a kind of psychological map. How we stretch toward clarity, turn inward to question, look to others for meaning, and sometimes contort ourselves trying to make sense of what we find. The grey palette enhances the ambiguity. These are not fully individuated beings, but symbolic forms, emotionally muted, abstracted from identity, suspended in a space without context. Their interactions are not social, but psychological. The space they inhabit may be a dream, a metaphorical stage, or an internal landscape where physical posture expresses inattention, focus, or confusion. Ultimately, this drawing seems to resist definitive interpretation. It offers no climax, no resolution, only a constellation of human forms caught in the act of trying to perceive. The body becomes the site of questioning. And in a world oversaturated with noise and narrative, this quiet meditation on posture, gaze, and grey space invites the viewer not to understand, but to feel, to sense in their own body the familiar strain of trying to locate oneself in the world. 4 grey figures rendered in ink form a tableau. Though minimal in detail, their postures and gestures speak volumes. The first walks while gazing into his palm. The second hunches forward in motion. The third collapses to his knees, arms stretched in silent intensity. The fourth stands still, one hand at his chin, the other pointing back in an accusatory arc. These figures, anonymous and monochrome, become characters in an enigmatic, wordless drama, a sequence of actions frozen in time, rich with symbolic resonance. The scene can be read as a psychological or existential narrative, moving from inquiry to burden to collapse to judgment. The first figure, absorbed in what he holds in his hand, might represent curiosity, introspection, or discovery. His gaze turned inward toward his palm suggests the beginning of a personal quest or confrontation with something unknown. The act of looking into one's own hand may symbolize the search for meaning, truth, or responsibility. He moves forward, but his attention is not on the path. He is absorbed in something smaller, private, possibly dangerous. This is the moment of origin, the moment before awareness gives rise to consequence. The second figure, hunched and still in motion, seems to carry a weight. His posture, stooped, perhaps weary, evokes a feeling of burden or guilt. He follows the first, yet his body tells a different story. He does not look inward nor forward. There is no object in his hand, only the sense of heaviness in his body. He may be reacting to the discovery of the first, or struggling under the unseen consequences of that discovery. This is the stage of suffering, when knowledge or awareness begins to demand a cost and the body bends under its weight. The third figure breaks the flow. He is no longer walking. He has fallen to his knees, arms outstretched and tense, as if pleading or resisting. His position is the most dramatic, the most physically expressive. Something has overwhelmed him. This figure becomes a focal point in the sequence, embodying a moment of collapse, confrontation, or spiritual surrender. He could be reaching towards something lost or trying to hold something back. He is no longer bearing the weight quietly. He is in full expression of it. This is the moment of crisis. Then, on the far right, the final figure stands upright and alert. His body language is both thoughtful and decisive. With one hand, he holds his chin, contemplation, judgment, calculation, and with the other, he points back at the stooped figure. His accusing finger suggests blame, moral clarity, or the enforcement of some unseen law. He is not moving, he stands apart, while the others are engaged in a struggle of motion and emotion. He is the figure of judgment or consequence. This final stage could represent society, conscience, or the inner critic, looking back at the path that led to collapse and pronouncing a verdict. Taken together, the four figures form a symbolic arc, like a visual parable. The drawing reads as a meditation on cause and effect, on inner life and outer response. The transition from quiet introspection to collapse, followed by condemnation, mirrors countless narratives of personal fall and public judgment. But in this case, the story is told not through facial expression or dialogue, but through posture alone, body as narrative. There's a timeless, almost mythic quality to this arrangement. It recalls ancient friezes or stained glass panels where a story is distilled into a sequence of gestures. The anonymity of the figures, grey, featureless, enhances their universality. These could be internal states of a single psyche, stages in a transformation, or representatives of larger forces at play: curiosity, guilt, despair, and authority. The use of ink reinforces the starkness of the scene. Ink is unforgiving, like memory or moral judgment. There is no softness, no revision. Each line is fixed, as are the figures, captured in a moment that will not change. The monochrome palette suggests a world drained of emotion or absolutes. Everything exists in grey, morally ambiguous, emotionally muted. Ultimately, this drawing invites the viewer into an interpretive role. Who is the protagonist? Is the accuser justified or blind to his own complicity? Is the kneeling figure being punished, or is he the only one to fully feel the weight of truth? Does the first figure know what he holds in his palm? The image provides no answers, only gestures, gestures that, like ancient rituals, suggest truths beyond language. In this way, the drawing becomes more than a depiction. It becomes a mirror. Each viewer may see a different story in the sequence, depending on where they are in their own inner narrative. The figures are silent, but they speak clearly to those willing to listen. In the world of images, some artworks feel less like creations and more like visions, mysterious visitations from the unconscious mind, surfacing in symbolic form. A series of ink drawings depicting grey figures standing side by side in varying postures might be seen not merely as an artistic expression or social commentary, but as a symbolic procession, archetypal figures emerging from the depths of the psyche, each posture echoing the timeless gestures of the human soul navigating its journey. Grey, in the language of dreams and myths, is the colour of twilight, uncertainty, and in-betweenness. It lives at the threshold between the black of the unknown and the white of full clarity. These figures, then, appear not as individuals in the literal world, but as shadow beings, representatives of the liminal state between waking and sleeping, life and death, knowing and forgetting. They may resemble ancestors, lost selves, or soul fragments that haunt the inner corridors of memory and imagination. Seen through this symbolic lens, the differing postures of the figures become significant not in terms of external behavior, but internal states of being. Each stance might represent a stage of the soul's transformation. One figure, slouched in exhaustion, may speak to despair or surrender. Another, standing tall, may symbolize awakening or resilience. Another, bending forward, may express grief or humility. These are not people in line. They are inner figures in dialogue. Their arrangement, standing together in stillness, can evoke the ancient idea of a procession or a rite of passage. Perhaps they are gathered in some sacred dream space, enacting a ritual the viewer is only just remembering. Like figures in an initiation rite, each one carries a secret, a lesson, or a threshold to cross. The repetition of similar forms with subtle variations recalls the structure of myth itself, cyclical, echoing, transformative. Carl Jung spoke of archetypes as universal patterns of behavior, an image that emerge from the collective unconscious. These figures may represent such archetypes, stripped of specific cultural symbols, but rich with resonance. The grey colour reinforces this. It levels individuality and evokes the dream logic of symbols. Not this person or that, but the idea of personhood, the energy of posture, the myth of embodiment. In another reading, the figures can be understood as guardians of a forgotten threshold. They might be stationed at the border of the unconscious, each standing in a different posture, as if responding to the traveller who approaches. One might welcome, another block, another simply witness. Their silent stance suggests a waiting for the viewer to ask the right question, to recognize their own reflection among the shades. Ink, as a material, intensifies this impression. It recalls the oldest forms of mark making, charcoal on cave walls, runes etched into bone, symbols brushed onto parchment. The permanence and gravity of ink suggest that this is not a fleeting vision, but a timeless one. These beings have always been here, waiting to be seen. There is also a ghostliness to them. The grey tone, the lack of detail, the uniformity in their form, all evoke spirits more than bodies. They might be the echoes of former selves, aspects of the soul that have been forgotten or repressed. In many spiritual traditions, healing comes not by denying these aspects, but by turning toward them, acknowledging, integrating, honoring. This series may be seen as such an act of honoring, bringing forth the quiet voices within and giving them form. The stillness of the figures also has an unsettling quality. Are they alive? Are they statues? Are they in mourning or in witness? Their presence resists conclusion. They seem to wait, not impatiently, but eternally. This suspension evokes the kind of silence found in sacred spaces where the absence of noise allows revelation to emerge. Viewers who stay long enough in that silence may find that these figures begin to shift, not physically, but psychically. They become mirrors, each posture reflecting a part of the viewer's own unconscious landscape. This reading resists logical closure. It does not seek to pin meaning to the drawings like butterflies to a board. Instead, it invites a deeper kind of seeing, a willingness to sit with ambiguity, with symbol, with the haunting beauty of half-remembered dreams. The series might then be read not as art in the traditional sense, but as an oracular device, a kind of inked tarot spread. Each figure, a card, each posture, a message. In the end, this series may not be meant to be explained at all. Like myths, like dreams, it operates on a different register, one that bypasses intellect and moves directly into the realm of intuition and feeling. The grey figures do not ask to be solved. They ask to be witnessed. And in that witnessing, something ancient within us begins to stir. Art often invites interpretation, but not all art demands meaning in the narrative sense. Sometimes a visual composition exists not to tell a story or pose a question, but simply to explore the rhythm, structure, and balance of form. A series of ink drawings featuring grey figures standing side by side with varying postures can be understood not through symbolism or social metaphor, but as an abstract orchestration of visual elements, shape, contrast, repetition, and variation. At its core, this series may be an exercise in composition. Like musical notes arranged along a staff, the grey figures line up rhythmically across the paper, their postures offering visual beats or accents. One figure curves, the next stands tall, another tilts at a diagonal. These shifts in line and form create a cadence, guiding viewers' eyes across the plane in much the same way a melody leads a listener through time. The inked figures function like visual syllables, composing a silent poem in line and gesture. Rather than focusing on what the figures mean, one might instead consider how they behave visually. Ink is an uncompromising medium. It bleeds, it stains, it clings to paper with an immediacy that resists revision. There's something performative about using ink for such minimal forms. Each stroke is final. The artist's hand is visible not in grand expressive sweeps, but in the economy of decision, where the line begins, how it curves, how pressure thickens or thins a limb. Simplicity is deceptive. Like calligraphy, this style of drawing lives in precision and timing. It is not about message, but about movement and control. The grey tones add another layer of subtlety. In abandoning full black, the artist softens the contrast, inviting the eye to linger. Grey becomes a matter of mood, not meaning, a tone that allows light and shadow to whisper rather than shout. The figures become sculptural, nearly weightless, as if they might dissolve into the paper if we stare too hard. Their neutrality makes them less like characters and more like glyphs, symbols in an unknown language that speaks not in words, but in atmosphere. One could even interpret the figures as architectural. Their stances echo structural forms, pillars, beams, arches in soft motion. This series could be viewed as a study in verticality, an homage to uprightness. The varying postures mimic the imperfections in human-built environments, the sag of an old post, the lean of a tree against wind. The figures collectively form a skyline of organic architecture, shifting only slightly from one to the next, yet holding a collective coherence. Another way to approach these drawings is through the lens of minimalism. In this perspective, the reduction of color, the uniformity of shape, and similar forms serve not to tell a story, but to strip away distractions. Minimalism often asks us to focus not on what is depicted, but how space is used. The white negative space between figures becomes as important as the figures themselves. The intervals breathe. They create a rhythm of presence and absence, a silent syncopation between line and void. Posture, too, is stripped of expression and becomes instead a study in variation. Each figure bends or leans not to convey emotion, but to explore how minor shifts in geometry can change the balance of an image. One figure might project tension through angularity, another through curve. This visual variation doesn't ask us to sympathize or relate, it asks us to see, to become sensitive to nuance in visual weight, direction, and density. We may approach each figure not as a separate statement, but as part of a larger flow. Each figure becomes a brushstroke in a larger act of visual mindfulness. This kind of serial drawing is as much about the process as the result, about entering a quiet state where the line becomes instinctual and the distinctions between one posture and the next arise organically. In this reading, meaning is not assigned, it is discovered through attention. These ink figures don't ask to be deciphered, they ask to be watched. Like clouds, waves, or birds on a wire, their arrangement matters not because of any narrative intent, but because of the visual satisfaction it provides. The viewer is invited into a state of quiet looking, where interpretation falls away and the work is allowed to exist as form, motion, and tone. Thus, what may appear to be a simple line of grey figures is, in this view, a complex visual meditation. Not a story of people, not a metaphor for society, but an exploration of the possibilities of posture, the choreography of ink, and the delicate dance of sameness and difference. The work speaks not to our intellect, but to our senses, a slow, quiet unfolding of a shape and space that rewards the patient eye.